Hi again, everybody. Dr. Lee Coleman, I'm glad you're with me. I want to talk today about an issue that's a good illustration of the dangers of the juggernauts that is the collaboration that seems to be engulfing our society. I'm talking about the relationship between medicine, psychiatry, industry, in this case, pharmaceutical industry, and medical and psychiatric associations that and the power of media, the power of a digital society to influence people in such powerful ways. These are phenomena that we have to live with now. We desperately need to get as much control as we can as a population so that they don't drive us, but we control them. I'm talking about the opioid crisis, the fact that addiction to the opioids has become a major, major problem, hitting wide swaths of the population and being emblematic of the way drugs in general are just dumped into our society. We're in real danger of having a society which just gets so used to the idea of being chemically influenced that it becomes routine. I've talked already about how psychiatry contributes to that by alleging that it's diagnosing people and then it's so ready to put people on medication. The opioid crisis is a little broader issue than that because many times the prescriptions are coming from non-psychiatric physicians. As you may not realize that more psychiatric medications are being prescribed by non-psychiatrists, MDs, than by psychiatrists. But of course, the influence and the training of those doctors is coming from psychiatrists, so they're both very much responsible for that. But physicians who deal with people who may have pain for one reason or another, different kinds of medical issues, but do they have the kind of pain that is appropriately treated, and if so, with what kind of medication is really the issue. And unfortunately, we've developed a system where there's so much of these medications out there in society, so easily obtained, that opioid addiction, that is artificially synthesized opioids rather than heroin or rather than morphine or the chemically produced heroin, but other products like OxyContin and so forth are being prescribed by doctors. So the question of, is it appropriate for a person to be taking this medication? Have they frankly bought it under shady circumstances just to maintain an addiction? Or is leading to a trap in which vulnerable people become addicted or are encouraged to continue the addiction primarily as a way of making money? That is, the suppliers of the drugs that the doctors prescribe are making money. I'm not talking about the people addicted making money. There's a good article in the New Yorker, October the 30th, 2017, that gives us a summary of one of the major culprits in this, which was Purdue Pharmaceuticals, which was a product of the Sackler family. The Sacklers, it started as two doctors in the New York area. I'm quite familiar with the work of Dr. Arthur Sackler, who was a big proponent of physical interventions in psychiatry, a big proponent of electric shock treatment. A lot of money from Arthur Sackler went into funding some very nice parts of the Smithsonian. We're not here to question any of that. But offspring of the original Sacklers, the Sackler family, ultimately went into investing in various ways, and pharmaceutical industry was one. I urge you to become familiar with that if you have enough interest in this topic. But the the juggernaut, as they say, of pharmaceutical companies wanting to sell their product, leading to educating doctors in a certain way, has collaborated such that vulnerable populations end up having access to these drugs. I had direct exposure to that in a relatively small way in the following manner. Some years back, California passed a new regulation, this probably goes back about 15 years or so, that every physician had to get 12 hours of additional continuing education to maintain their license. As you probably wouldn't be surprised to hear, all physicians are required to get a minimal amount of continuing education for the rest of their career so they can keep up to date. And when I was advised by the state of California that these 12 hours were required, I looked around to see by what methods you could do that. You could go to individual conferences. What I found was the most efficient way was to get tape recordings of people who had given the lectures. There's no reason you have to physically be there when you can listen to what they say, and then you have to be examined to see if you've absorbed the knowledge. And what I could see in the educational materials was that doctors were being the recipients of very heavy pressure, that patients should never be put in a situation where pain that was something that could be relieved should be allowed to go on. That these medications that we now had were non-addictive. Of course, that turned out to be not true. And therefore, the bottom line is that doctors should not be hesitant to use these medications to render the patients pain-free. Well, what happened is doctors, when they're trained that they have an obligation to make the patient pain-free, and pain is something that you cannot measure, sometimes it's very clear that the patient is in pain of a severe sort. But if somebody tells you they're having a certain amount of pain in certain situations, even though they might not appear so bad in your office, it's easy to get doctors to feel that they're under pressure to prescribe the medication. So that's just one little example of how we, unfortunately, as a society, had a system that was created a few years back in which so much of this medication is out there. The doctors, which are the key link, because it can't get in people's hands unless it's prescribed to somebody. And if the system is very loose as far as where those medications end up, we have a big problem on our hands. It's just an example of where we need an educated and intelligent consumer population to not be pulled into the traps that a system which is too closely allied between the medical side and the business side, we need to keep up our vigilance about those kind of situations. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you next time.